Hey Teddy, what'd you think of that workout? We talked about this. I'm not going to do that. But what is going on, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Sarah, and I hope each and every one of you is having a beautiful day, and I hope that you are all doing okay and navigating the shorter and shorter daylight hours, especially here in the northern hemisphere, where it's right now getting dark at 6 o'clock p.m., soon to be 5 o'clock p.m. at daylight savings time, so to that. So, hopefully you're getting through the dark times okay amid everything else in 2020. But thanks for coming for another video. If you are new to the channel, thanks for coming on board. I hope you'll consider subscribing. And if you've been here before, thanks for coming back and joining me for the second installment in the Zwift Academy Try series, where I'm going to be taking on cycling workout number 2, which is aerobic threshold development. Now, I will also be taking on the run workouts. If you didn't see my Zwift Academy run video, I went through the first workout and I had a very hard time using the treadmill at the gym with very little airflow while wearing the mask. So I'm still trying to figure out an alternative to be able to do those workouts, whether I do them outside with my Stride power meter or try to find another treadmill to use in a more private environment where I don't have to wear the mask, but more to come on those workouts. But at any rate, we're talking about the aerobic threshold development workout today, and I do want to spend a couple of minutes focusing on that word threshold in the middle of that title, because it could be very misleading to many folks. I know a lot of my viewers are new to Zwift, probably new to power and training with power, and potentially new to cycling altogether, or taking on cycling more seriously for the first time, and a lot of these terminology being used or nomenclature could be very confusing. So let me take a few minutes to go through that. If this is repeat information for you, I will leave timestamps in the show notes below, so you can go ahead and skip ahead to the actual core of the workout. But if you're not familiar with these terms, stick around for a few minutes and I will cover this meaning of threshold and how it really will work and how it applies to this workout. You've probably heard the word threshold before when you're talking about training with power, that number, that FTP number, that functional threshold power that you maybe tested here on Zwift, that really painful, gross, either ramp test, 20-minute test, 8-minute test, or maybe even hour-long test, or maybe you're just approximating. No matter how you are establishing that number, it's yucky, right? It's a very uncomfortable number, and that's where we hear that word threshold, and that's where you might get some confusion in looking at this title, aerobic threshold. They are different things. So I want to kind of give you some definitions that you can work with to put these in context. I'm going to start with functional threshold power, and I'm going to kind of work my way backwards so that you can understand aerobic threshold in the larger lens of those different threshold numbers and training zones. So functional threshold power, I don't want to say it's a made-up number, but it is artificially constructed as a proxy for something known as lactate threshold, which I'll talk about in a minute. But it's a way that athletes can do these tests at home without being in a specific either assisted or laboratory environment to get an approximation of what their capacity is to work at a threshold level effort, so that you can build training zones around that number. That is really the core idea of that number. I know many people use it for bragging rights, but it's actually intended to build solid training zones. So if you are used to training on Zwift, your gray zone, your blue zone, your green zone, your yellow, your red zones, those are all your training zones built around that functional threshold number, or FTP, that you put in the system, and it scatters you around known values and gives you a pretty decent approximation of what your recovery zone is, or your zone 1, what your endurance or zone 2 is, what your tempo or aerobic zone 3 is, what your threshold zone 4 is, and zone 5 and above, depending on if you use zone 5 or zone 5, 6, 7, that's going to be your VO2 max zone up into your sprint level power or neuromuscular power. And establishing those zones will allow you to create structured workouts that you can wrap your head around from both a power output and a perceived exertion standpoint, and you can continue to train those systems. So that's where FTP comes in. Now, I said it was a proxy for lactate threshold. Lactate threshold can only be tested either in a laboratory environment or with the proper equipment, because you are testing the lactate in the blood. So without getting into the specifics of the test, basically you are riding on a bike, or this could be done in a run as well, but this is where maybe a doctor or some kind of technician is going to be taking your blood periodically throughout a workout and tracking that against your power output. And they're looking for this kind of magic number, which is 4 millimoles per liter of lactate in the bloodstream. Once you've broken that threshold of 4 millimoles, you are no longer clearing lactate from the system. So that lactate threshold power is the point at which your body is no longer able to clear lactate at the same rate that it's being produced. That's where you exit your aerobic zone and enter your anaerobic zone. So that's where that little tiny sliver of space, that lactate threshold that we try to approximate with FTP, is important because we want to be able to maintain the ability to clear lactate if we want to ride for longer periods of time. Now that number is generally defined as a power value that you can hold for about an hour before that lactate starts to supersede the ability of the body to clear that lactate. It doesn't mean it's comfortable. It doesn't feel nice. In fact, running at lactate threshold is extremely uncomfortable. And just because you have a lactate threshold value does not mean you are going to automatically be able to hold it for an hour. That has to be trained. Even the highest performing athletes in the world have to train that system. And many of them cannot actually achieve their lactate threshold for an hour. Some of them get up to like 97 or 98% of their lactate threshold value, but it takes a lot of mental toughness, a lot of efficiency, a lot of work and comfort in a particular position where you can execute that power. So don't think just because you have a lactate threshold or an FTP value, that means you're going to automatically be able to hold that number for an hour. In the social media sphere, the Monday night quarterbacks of coaching, so to speak, they'll tell you, well, if you can't hold it for an hour, it's not your FTP or not your lactate threshold. That's actually incorrect. That's inaccurate information, and any reputable coach or exercise scientist will tell you that that's incorrect as well. This is a theoretical value. So that's important. So now that you know the difference between functional threshold power and lactate threshold, you can kind of understand what's being spoken about here. But generally speaking, if you test effectively your FTP, you're probably going to track between 5 and 10%. So you can get a good approximation. That's why that FTP number actually has a great deal of value. Now there's another number known as anaerobic threshold. Now many people use lactate threshold and anaerobic threshold interchangeably, but a coach or an exercise scientist will wag their finger and tell you that those are different numbers. They're tested differently. The anaerobic threshold versus lactate threshold is testing your oxygen consumption and what you are burning for fuel. So before you reach that threshold, you are generally burning about a 50% to 50% ratio of carbohydrates to fat. That puts you very comfortably in your aerobic zone. And once you start passing that threshold into the anaerobic zone, you start to increase the fuel utilization that comes from carbohydrates and vastly decreasing what comes from fat. This is why in my last video, I talked about many people who are using this very high intensity interval training and constant racing in Zwift, constantly sharpening that top end, but they're gonna run out of energy at the bottom because they're not working their ability to use different types of fuel. They're using that very short, fast burning carbohydrate source. They run out, burn their glycogen, and then they die out very quickly. That's why working your aerobic zone becomes more important for reasons that will become clear in a minute. So just understand that that aerobic threshold is where you're testing. You start to break down that balance of 50-50 carbohydrate burn to fat burn. Now that works us back to this aerobic threshold. So aerobic threshold isn't really a power number that you necessarily need, but it's where you pass that threshold where you just start creating lactate in the system, right? You're really not producing appreciable lactate by walking around or spinning really easily on the bike, or for those trained runners out there going for a light jog, you're really not producing very much lactate. But once you enter into that aerobic zone where you're starting to get your heart rate up and it's a little bit, you can't necessarily talk and ride or run quite as easily anymore, this is when you're starting to produce lactate in the system. And that's the threshold that you reach. And we're talking about this zone, this aerobic zone, where we're burning that 50% to 50% of carbohydrates to fat. And working that zone and being able to bring your heart rate down over time while working in that zone, you're able to push your power up. This is what I was talking about in the last video, but I'm putting a little bit more nomenclature behind it. It's very important to have the ability to work harder for a longer period of time in that aerobic zone and that 50-50 carbohydrate to fat burning zone. It's basically your fallback position to be able to kind of come in and out of your high end. Now, working in that zone 1, zone 2, that recovery to low endurance state, that is also important to build some of that biological durability that I talked about. But working in this central aerobic zone is also important. You need to be able to grow that capacity and develop that skill over time. So that's a good point to segue into today's workout, this aerobic threshold development workout. This is key to being able to build your capacity to work at those aerobic zones. This is the bread and butter for a long course triathlete or even just an endurance level cyclist. These are things that you need to work again and again over time. Now this workout's only an hour and 15 minutes. It's really just a primer for bigger and better workouts you should be doing if you are a longer course athlete. You're going to get a good baseline here. If you have not worked your aerobic zones effectively or you're new to cycling, this might be difficult for you. That's okay. It's supposed to be. Your heart rate might start to track out of control. That's why these intervals are a little bit shorter and they grow over time so that you can build that resilience and come back to this workout again and again. But if you are more experienced with endurance, in the coach's notes, they did recommend that you can tack 1, 2, 3, 4 of these together if you have the time and the capacity to do so, and it's still a very effective workout for that go all day system, which is your aerobic zone. But let me get on the bike. I'm going to do this workout and I'll talk more about the specificity of the intervals, how they fed in context. Let's hope these ones are not 55 to 65 RPM because those were god awful. I don't think that they are, but I'll give you my feedback when I'm done. Don't worry, Teddy approves of the workout. He's just salty with me because I won't post his OnlyFans link on my YouTube account. I mean, I just didn't think it was appropriate. He doesn't listen. We argue about this every day. I'm not a crazy cat lady. I know the cats can't talk. It's just a joke. Please don't go away. I'm not that crazy. I mean, a little crazy. My watch is yelling at me. Anyway, back to the workout. It's an hour and 10 minutes long of endurance work. I'll go straight into the intervals first and the structure. I'll circle back around and kind of talk about some of the more overarching themes and some tips coming into the workout. So, this overall workout is going to be structured in a series of quarter-hour over-unders. So I'm going to go more into the specifics so this makes more sense. You're going to start with a 10-minute warm-up. It's the ramp-up warm-up starting at 45% of FTP and moving all the way up to 80% of your FTP. Then you're going to go straight into the intervals. You're not going to get a recovery here. You're moving straight into your aerobic zone and kind of hanging out there for most of the workout. So this next block is going to be 16 minutes long, and it's set up as a 4x, 2 minutes on at 82% of your FTP, and then 2-minute under effort at 75% of your FTP. And then you're gonna repeat that 4 times. So 2 minutes over at 82% of your FTP and 2 minutes under at 75% of your FTP. So after you've done that 4 times for a total of 16 minutes, you're going to get a 3-minute recovery valley at 55% of your FTP. And the purpose of that is to get back in control of your cadence. You're going to bring your heart rate down a little bit because you're going to get a little bit of that cardiac drift as you move through the intervals. Then you're going to move into a 15-minute set, which is structured as a 3x, 3 minutes on at that same 82% of FTP and 2 minutes off at that 75% of FTP. So 3 minutes on, 2 minutes off. That's going to be 3 times for a total of 15 minutes. Then you're going to get a 5-minute recovery valley at this time at 55% of your FTP. Same concept here. Slowing the heart rate down, getting any control over your breathing if you're struggling with this type of work, getting your cadence back under control. Important stuff to go into the last and most difficult set. This is going to be another 16-minute block, but this is a 2x, 4 minutes on at that 82% of FTP, and 4 minutes off at 75% of FTP. Then you're going to go back to 4 minutes on and 4 minutes off again. Pretty straightforward stuff. Then you're going to get a 5-minute cool down that starts you at 75% of FTP and ramps you down to about 50% of your FTP. So you can see in this workout that Dr. Dan Plews has given a lot of respect to your time here. It's a very efficient workout. There's not a whole ton of fluff. The warm-up brings you ramped up right into your aerobic zone. There's no screwing around. You go right into the intervals. You only get a short amount of rest in that time, really just to mitigate that cardiac drift and any kind of bogging of the cadence to get you to reset, and then you go right back into work. So this is a very efficient workout for your time. This is why this is one of those workouts that you can multiply by 2 or 3 to do more work. You're doing 46 minutes of work in an hour and 10 minutes of time on the bike. So definitely very efficient. It's a good workout to come back to, and it's great to work on. The idea of this workout is not to necessarily push your power, because that's not the purpose of a long course triathlete for whom these workouts are designed, or even an endurance cyclist who these can be very good for. The purpose is to make you break down later and to make these power zones feel easier. You want your heart rate to almost be a mismatch to your power. So right now my heart rate for 82% of my FTP is going to be a little above my zone 2 heart rate. My goal as I come back to these workouts is to get that heart rate down into that zone 2 range and get my perceived exertion, my cardiovascular strain to a lower rate for a higher amount of work. Even though I might not even be pushing up my FTP or reaching my genetic potential in terms of power, I am making those longer efforts more manageable by coming back to aerobic work like this. This is where this type of base work and aerobic work can be very important, whether you are a road racer for cycling, you're a triathlete, even short course triathletes can get some value out of workouts like this. Sprinkle this in with your speed work and it can build some very good foundations for you. Now, this workout can certainly be very dry, especially if you extend them out to do 2 or 3 of these in a row, if that's what's in your training plan. So find something entertaining. I was listening to podcasts today. You can listen to an audiobook. You can watch a movie. You can even, some people can read. I can't really focus. My eyes, they're not the best, and it kind of bothers me to try to move and read, but you could certainly do that. What I would recommend more than that is to actually use these sets as ways to practice your position, to practice your technique, to practice things like cadence. There's no outline cadence here. You're using your self-selected cadence. Thank God, because if I had to do another rep at 55 RPM, I might have just, no way, no thank you. I did not enjoy that one little bit. But you can use this if you struggle with things like cadence, then maybe you take one of those 2-minute blocks or 4-minute blocks and you say, okay, I'm going to do 90 RPM just for this one 4-minute block and I'm going to work on that, and sprinkle those throughout the workout. Or maybe you're concentrating on the shoe scraper action or the pull-up of the pedal stroke, or maybe you can do left side power and right side power. You can focus on being in that aero position. In fact, for triathletes, it's recommended that these on efforts are done in the aerodynamic position so that you're used to generating the power in that right position. You can make the workout and get whatever value you want out of it. I don't think this is a workout that is going to be necessarily an easy workout for people. It's going to be that kind of annoying, somewhat difficult level of effort for most people. But to be able to focus on other things, it will just help you to pass the time. This is where indoor work is a little bit more difficult than outdoor work because you have less to engage with on the indoor trainer than you do on the road, whether you're avoiding the pothole or looking at the pretty trees or riding away from the dog that likes to chase you every time you ride by. Whatever that may be, it's a little bit easier sometimes to reach these power levels outdoors for a number of psychological and physiological reasons, but you get a lot of quality work done on the indoor trainer, and this workout is no different. If you're going to do one of these at a time for an hour and 10 minutes, you can certainly do it fasted. If you're going to start tying them together, this might be a good time to practice your nutrition strategy for a race. If you're going to be in a 70.3 or a full Ironman, this might be a good workout for race pace. You're kind of at your 70.3 and full Ironman paces. Your over-unders are pretty much well aligned. So you can kind of practice what kind of nutritional strategies you might put into place for 2, 3, 4 hours. Or you can do it fasted. It depends on what your objectives are. But that's pretty much it. It's a straightforward endurance workout. There's not a whole lot of strategy involved, just a few tips of things that you can potentially work on to get the most amount of value out of this workout for what your particular ride needs are. But please, again, I said this in the last workout, do not ignore this type of work. Don't think it's too easy. It's extremely important and will make you a more well-rounded athlete if you include this at least 1-2 times a week, this type of long aerobic or even endurance level work. You will become a much stronger and more durable athlete. But if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, I know I went through a lot in the beginning for those of you who are new to cycling, please feel free to leave them in the comments down below. I'll do the best that I can to answer them down there. Please like this video if you got any value out of it. I really would appreciate it. It does help the video and the channel out quite a bit. Subscribe if you haven't already, and as always, I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.